Capitalism can never stay home. It goes abroad. The ordinary people simply paid the cost of empire.
In 1910, the Union of South Africa was created out of the former British colonies of the Cape and Natal, the Boer republics of Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. And in 1912, the Native National Congress was founded. This was later renamed the African National Congress, or the ANC. And in 1913, the Land Act was introduced. This prevented black people, except those living in Cape Province, from buying land outside reserves. On July 1st, 1914, the National Party, or NP, was founded. From its outset, it was an ethnic national party aiming to promote the interests of Afrikaners who were descendants of Dutch, German, and French colonists, and to defend their language, culture, and identity. An explicitly
You don't
white
have
nationalist...
culture or identity. I'm sorry. Like, you just don't.
Just colonizer culture.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
An explicitly white nationalist agenda for settlers in a resource-rich African territory. The party's first leader was J.B.M. Hertzog, who served from 1914 to 1934. During this period, the NP's ideology focused on Afrikaner nationalism, anti-British sentiment, and minority interests. The party advocated for greater autonomy for Afrikaners within the British-dominated Union of South Africa. In 1918, a secret society known as the Afrikaner Broederbond, or the AB, was founded, with similar motives to promote their interests and advancement of the Afrikaner people. The organization, initially named the Jong Zwede Afrika, Africans for Young South Africa, was renamed the Broederbond in 1920. Exclusive membership was restricted to white, Protestant, Afrikaner men over the age of 25. The organization was invitation only, with a rigorous selection process. Its primary goal was to unite and empower Afrikaners, promoting their cultural, semi-religious, and deeply political objectives.
Fucking Nazis.
It literally is just like the Freemasons or any other like secret society, but like explicitly white nationalists and settler colonial base.
Yeah, and that's also a bund as well.
Yeah, it's a bund, yeah.
Nazis be doing Nazi stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
The Broederbond emerged during a tumultuous period in South African history, marked by the aftermath of the Boer War and the rise of Afrikaner nationalism. The British annexation of the South African Republic and the Orange Free State, as well as the Anglicization policies of Lord Milner, contributed to growing resentment among Afrikaners. It was this sentiment that led to the formation of the Broederbond and the National Party, which would later play a significant role in shaping apartheid policies.
Oh, we probably should add that the Orange Free State, which later became Rhodesia, because people are probably more familiar with Rhodesia.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Didn't realize
because especially there's a lot of right-wing shitheads online who like to cosplay as Rhodesians.
Oh, they love that shit.
Yeah, they like to hold Rhodesia up as if it was something special and not just
Just another one of these.
Another.
Like literally the same playbook. And they lost.
Oh, they lost.
Founding members of the Broederbond included H.J. Klopper, H.W. van der Merwe, D.H.C. Duplessis, and the Reverend... I don't know.
Duplessis.
And the Reverend
Sorry.
Jocelyn Naude. These leaders were instrumental in shaping the organization's early years and setting the stage for its future influence. Its members held influential positions in government, business, and academia, and its network of connections allowed it to exert considerable informal power. Some prominent members include D.F. Malan, former Prime Minister from 1948 to 54, B.J. Vorster, Prime Minister, P.W. Botha, another Prime Minister and Defense Minister, F.W. de Klerk, a former South African State President, Pik Botha, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Anton Rupert, billionaire entrepreneur and businessman, member in the 1940s and later left, G.L.P. Moerdijk, Afrikaans architect who designed the Voortrekker Monument, H.B. Thom, historian and former rector of Stellenbosch University, and J.S. Garrick, vice chancellor of Stellenbosch University. It's worth noting that between 1948 and 1994, the period of apartheid, every leader of the South African government was a member of the Afrikaner Broederbond. This is just to reiterate, the organization wielded significant influence in South African politics, culture, and society during the apartheid era.
All these guys with fucking Star Wars names. I
Yeah,
can't
they
handle
do
it.
sound like that.
Solo Fortunate Chaya.
That's really funny. Oh man.
Yeah, they should have just got laughed out of the country, to be honest.
Hmm.
I was thinking about that too earlier today. Like, how many people say that laughing at fascists is the way to combat them? I'm like, yeah, you remember when World War II, when the Nazis were defeated by like all the people who laughed at Hitler or the Nazis? It's like that didn't work at all. Like,
Nope. No, you had to have Stalin. Stalin had to be the guy.
but going back to just after the founding of the Broderbund, in 1920, the neighboring country of Namibia came under South African administration. To explain why, we need a brief history of Namibia under European colonialism. In 1884, the German Empire established rule over most of the territory, forming a colony known as German Southwest Africa. Between 1904 and 1908, German troops waged a punitive campaign against the Herero and Nama people, which escalated into the first genocide of the 20th century. German rule ended during the First World War with a defeat in 1915 by South African forces. In 1920, after the end of the war, the League of Nations mandated administration of the colony to South Africa. From 1948, with the National Party elected to power, this included South Africa applying apartheid to what was then known as Southwest Africa. In the later 20th century, uprisings and demands for political representation resulted in the United Nations assuming direct responsibility over the territory in 1966, but South Africa maintained de facto rule until 1973, when the UN recognized Southwest African People's Organization, or SWAPO, as the official representative of the Namibian people. Namibia gained independence from South Africa on March 21, 1990, following the South African Border War. This will come up again later. However, Walvis Bay and the Penguin Islands remained under South African control until 1994. But for our purposes here, this means that when we discuss the colonial crime of apartheid, this also applied to what is now modern Namibia in addition to South Africa.
Very interesting.
So we will return to 1934, when the Parliament of the Union of South Africa enacts the Status of the Union Act, which declares the country to be, quote, a sovereign independent state. The move followed on from Britain's passing of the Statute of Westminster in 1931, which removed the last vestiges of British legal authority over South Africa. And this brings us now to the infamous year of 1948, when apartheid was set into law. Apartheid is Afrikaans for separateness or apartheid. It was a system of institutionalized racial segregation characterized by an authoritarian political culture based on baaskap, literally meaning bossship or bosshood, which ensured that South Africa was dominated politically, socially, and economically by the nation's minority white population. Under this minoritarian system, white citizens held the highest status, followed by Indians as well as quote-unquote coloreds and then black Africans. The economic legacy and social effects of apartheid continue to the present day, particularly inequality. This policy was adopted when the National Party took power in the 1948 election. In legal terms, apartheid had three main pillars: the Population Registration Act, the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act, and the Group Areas Act. The Population Registration Act of 1950 was a key piece of apartheid legislation that classified all citizens into four main racial groups: white, black, also called Bantu, colored or mixed race, and Asian, which was later added. Every South African was required to be classified into one of these racial categories at birth. The categorization was often arbitrary, based on appearance, social acceptance, and descent, rather than scientific criteria. This is not surprising, as the concept of race, like gender, is a social construct composed of various loosely correlated traits rather than an immutable law of nature.
Yep.
That was a little editorial note of mine, but
I mean, it's absolutely true.
Race was just invented for the purposes of racism. That was why it was invented.
by slave owners for the purposes of dividing the, indentured servant class. But regardless, under the Population Registration Act, a person's racial classification determined their rights and opportunities in various aspects of life, including where they could live and work, political rights and voting, freedom of movement and settlement, property rights, education, and use of public services and facilities. Citing the book Sorting Things Out, Classification and Its Consequences by Jeffrey C. Bowker and Susan Lee Starr, approximately 1 million South Africans fell into the colored category at the time of the Population Registration and Group Areas Acts. It was among this group that the majority of borderline cases appeared most often in the form of a person labeled colored and desiring to be labeled white or European. Within the internal logic of apartheid, an apparatus had to be constructed to adjudicate these cases. The Registration Act had a proviso that if the person objected to a classification, he or she had 30 days in which to appeal. Several local administration boards were set up to hear borderline cases and reconsider classifications. Their decisions could be appealed up to the level of the Supreme Court, a costly and time-consuming business. The average waiting time for an appeal was 14 months. Many were longer, during which time the person existed in limbo. For example, if someone wanted to be classified white but was classified colored, she or he could not go to a white school. If they enrolled at a colored school, This could later become legal evidence that they were colored. Several took correspondence courses as a solution, as apartheid apparently did not work long distance. Interestingly, without a face-to-face component, it was not enforced. The havoc wreaked in the lives of those in between was considerable. A broadside issued by the South African Institute of Race Relations stated, quote, "While the Population Registration Act of 1950 did not affect the circumstances of the vast majority of the South African population, it created the utmost confusion as to the destiny of the small minority of people whose appearance, associations, and descent do not happen to coincide. The South African Institute of Race Relations pleads with all the power at its command that the small number of persons should be allowed to remain in the racial category in which they feel most at ease." And if that doesn't sound more like the gender social construct than anything, I don't know what does. It's like when you create this classification and then start enforcing arbitrary but militant rules on people based on them, it causes havoc.
It's really interesting as well, talking about how much havoc it causes from people being of mixed race and stuff like that, is it also caused massive problems for the Nazis during World War II, in that they would, like, because of their racial hatred of Jewish people, they would have people within their organizations, Nazi organizations, who would later find out they had a Jewish ancestor. And then all of a sudden they were excluded from being in the Nazi party, or in some instances they even got killed and became victims of the Holocaust. So it's like, it just shows the ridiculousness of the idea of race, and that even racists, they're like, yes, I hate the Jewish people, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I hate them so much. And then they find out, oh, it turns out I had a Jewish great-grandmother. Uh-oh. I guess I hate myself now. Like, I guess, yeah. Whoopsies.
Yeah, there's like zero logic really to it. It's all just hate and illogical sort of tribalistic control. You know, that's like all it's really aimed at.
And the worst part is the survivorship bias, because the people who stick around after that process, after you like get rid of people, whether it's through denying that COVID is a thing and you start drinking a bunch of raw milk and shunning doctors and science, the people who stick around don't remember that those other people didn't. They don't remember that a bunch of people died because, oh, I found Jewish ancestry and then my own party got rid of me. The people who stick around just like, oh yeah, this system is working fine for me, therefore it works. And they just keep doing that. They have no, they're like goldfish.
Yep. White supremacists are like goldfish. It's so fucking true.
Sorry, did you have something before I moved on, Jared? You were going to say something that looked like...
Oh, I was just going to say racism makes no sense. Hot take. Racism is bad and illogical. Don't at me.
Okay, so yeah, the South African Institute pleads with people to just let people remain in the racial category in which they feel most at ease. But this was not to be allowed by the nationalist government, as from August 1st, 1966, it became compulsory for all citizens of the Republic over the age of 16 years to be able to produce identification cards, on which the racial group of the holder is listed. Until then, large numbers of people on the racial borderline had apparently not submitted themselves for classification. Under the Population Registration Act, the children of mixed unions are, it appears, generally being classified according to the quote-unquote lower of the two layers involved, that is, the group carrying fewer privileges. But under the Group Areas Act, the children of colored and African parents, or Asian and African parents, would, while they were minors, be presumably classified according to the racial group of the father, in order that they might live with him and his wife in his group area. The child of an Indian father and an African mother might thus be brought up in an Indian environment, but on reaching the age of 16 and receiving his identity card, might be forced to leave his parents and change his mode of living and his associates to those of the African group. So it obviously
That's
makes
so
no
fucking
sense.
crazy. Like the level of division that causes in people, and just like the cognitive anguish. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you see that coming. Like the upheaval, you know, is going to come at this certain time, and like you're going to have to make arrangements for it. It's like, it's nonsense. But there were several factors involved in weaving the texture of categories in the lives of those in the borderlands of apartheid. Often there were long bureaucratic delays in assigning a racial classification to those who appeared ambiguous. The Associated Press cites a case in which 2 preschool children were held in detention for 3 years while they awaited a government decision about their race.
That sounds like Israel.
It sounds like the US with family separation and ICE camps too. It's like...
That too, yeah.
The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act was passed on July 8, 1949 as one of the first major pieces of apartheid legislation. It made marriages between white people and people of other racial groups illegal. The act worked in conjunction with the Population Registration Act and not only prohibited new interracial marriages, but also nullified existing interracial marriages of South Africans that occurred outside the country. That's crazy too. People who violated this act could be arrested and charged. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act remained in effect until 1985, when it was repealed by the Immorality and Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Amendment Act. Following the repeal, there was a gradual increase in interracial marriages. In 1987, mixed-race marriages accounted for 2.1% of all marriages in South Africa. And again, citing the book Sorting Things Out, any form of interracial sexuality was strictly forbidden by a series of immorality laws, some of which predated apartheid. Ormond, one of the authors of the study, states that, quote, between 1950 and the end of 1980, more than 11,500 people were convicted of interracial sex, anything from a kiss on up.
What the fuck?
Wait, it gets worse. These sexual borders were vigorously patrolled by police. Ormond continues, quote, Special Force Order 025N69 details use of binoculars, tape recorders, cameras, and two-way radios to trap offenders. It also spelled out that bed sheets should be felt for warmth and examined for stains. Police were also reported to have examined the private parts of couples and taken people to district surgeons for examination.
It sounds to me like you're just a bunch of fucking perverts and the
It
police.
literally is just the sex
That's-
police, like.
That's so disgusting. Listeners to the podcast will not be able to see this, but my mouth is agape. You know, that's so gross.
Yeah.
These are just a bunch of laws made by a bunch of sicko perverts who want to watch people have sex. Like, this is so fucking gross.
Don't fascists always sound like incels?
Yeah. Like,
Yep.
imagine the police who signed up to be in this particular division. Like, police are generally pretty bad, but then you have the sex police as well, the pervert division, whose job is to be peeping toms. It's like, what the fuck is this? Like,
Yeah.
so gross, so disgusting.
Yeah, those sick Nazi fucks.
So, the Group Areas Act, which forced people of certain races into living in designated areas. Although white minority rule and racial segregation were already in existence in South Africa, with non-whites having no voting rights, and efforts made to encourage segregation, apartheid intensified the segregation with stern penalties for non-whites entering into areas designated for whites only, without having a pass to permit them to do so. These were known as the Pass Laws.
I'd just like to add that the legacy of this continues even after apartheid has been ended. The areas in which people live are still racially segregated, not through law, but through economics, and that's the legacy of apartheid. The white people in South Africa are still very, very rich, and the black people in South Africa are still very, very poor. And you can actually go online and look at pictures, aerial photos of South Africa, where you have these huge areas of just slums and shanty towns, and then there's just a fence. And then right next is just a suburb that you would see in, like, America or Australia.
Yeah.
But they're right next to each other. And
Yeah.
there's a dividing fence. And that is the direct border between black and white, basically.
It's like that in the United States still to this day, where you've got neighborhoods on opposite sides of train tracks, and it's a totally different socioeconomic bracket. You know, what do they call that? Redlining or
Yep,
something?
absolutely.
Like that?
Yeah, that's the legacy of segregation here. The policy was called redlining, and we still have the leftover gerrymandering and obviously just the culturally separated and gentrified neighborhoods. But that's also one of the things that led me to believe that there is no revolutionary potential in these Western countries, because you have situations like that where not only are the poor people very aware of their oppressors and the wealthy people right around them, they're close to them. They're right next to them. They're not even geographically separated, and still nothing happens to these people. It really blows my mind, but I don't want to get into that too much. Let's wrap it up here. Jumping in real quick just to say, this was recorded December 3rd, the night before Brian Thompson was assassinated. So there were forced removals. Between 1960 and 1983, approximately 3.5 million black and colored people were forcibly removed from their homes in areas newly designated for other racial groups. It resulted in the breaking up of families, friendships, and entire established communities. This was enforced through various means, including violent actions such as bulldozing homes and threatening residents with weapons, but also non-violent methods like spreading fear, bribing community leaders, and imposing unfair building restrictions. Some notable examples include Sophiatown, where in 1955, thousands of police officers forcibly removed black residents from this Johannesburg suburb, or District 6, a mixed population neighborhood in Cape Town that was razed in the 1970s, displacing at least 60,000 people. The act limited property ownership and occupation rights based on racial classification and was partly used to reduce commercial competition from Indian traders in urban centers. In some areas, like Mokopane, the act was not fully implemented due to economic considerations related to homeland policies.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
So I have a side note here. We have so far laid enough groundwork to explain how white South Africans came to possess mineral mines and the racial stratification of the workers and owners, even before the official codification under apartheid. So let's take a moment to relate this to a modern, if somewhat tabloid example, the family of Elon Musk. Hey. So now, we can leave aside Elon's behavior and go back to his ancestors and their ties to imperial looting, starting with his parents. Elon's mother, May Musk, is a model and dietitian. She has been a model for 50 years, appearing on the covers of magazines, including a Time Magazine Health Edition, Women's Day International editions of Vogue, and Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. She holds Canadian, South African, and American citizenship.
Colonizer speedrunning citizenships right there. Just like, fuck, she should move to Australia and get one here as well. Just get all the colonizer citizenships, why don't you? Like,
Her parents, by the way, were very fanatical in favor of apartheid. This is quite interesting. Her parents came to South Africa from Canada because they sympathized with the Afrikaner government. They used to support Hitler and all that sort of stuff. But they didn't know, obviously, I don't think they knew what the Nazis were doing. But they in Canada, they were in the German party in Canada, and they sympathized with the Germans.
Yeah.
So when the Afrikaners government came into power here in 1948, then May's father, who was quite an interesting guy, he was a very good pilot, he said he wants to be with the Afrikaners because he agrees with apartheid, you see. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And he came out here with his family.
It's funny, like, out of all the people I'm going to detail here, I was the most generous. That's all I'm going to say about May Musk, his mother, because she's probably of the people I'm going to talk about, she's the nicest one. And once again, reminding listeners that since this was recorded in early December 2024, even though this will be released just days after Elon's Nazi salutes at Trump's inauguration, we obviously don't discuss that in this episode. All we knew about Elon at the time was his long track record of fascist retweets and dog whistles. Regardless, recent events, and Errol's own words here, give us a pretty good idea of the mindset of white South Africans like the Musk family. We also recorded this before May Musk's recent interview on Fox and Friends, in which she gave her advice to struggling working-class families.
When I had my children, we were in a two-bedroom small apartment overlooking a garage. And then the next year, I have the second child, we had an apartment with a view. And then by the third child, we could get a two-bedroom house. And you just, as you move on, you start doing better and better. But people, you don't have to go to the movies. You don't have to go out for dinner. You can just spend time with the most wonderful gifts you can ever have as a children.
Obviously, Elon Musk is horrible. His siblings, I don't really care so much about. I'm really just interested in his ancestors. His father is the worst one. And I was expecting, to be honest, for the generational wealth to go back further, like for the mines to be owned several generations back. It was just his dad. His dad got into the mining industry, but I'll detail it here. So, Elon's father, Errol Graham Musk, is a retired South African engineer, politician, and businessman. Errol Musk studied electromechanics at the University of Pretoria, worked as an electrical and mechanical engineering consultant, and developed properties, especially retail and office property development. His lucrative engineering business took on, quote, large projects such as office buildings, retail complexes, residential subdivisions, and an Air Force base. He also owned an auto parts store, as well as, quote, one of the biggest houses in Pretoria. In 1979, Musk and his wife May divorced. May's book recalls that at the time of the divorce, he owned 2 homes, a yacht, a plane, 5 luxury cars, and a truck. In her memoir, May characterized her marriage as abusive and alleged Errol had been violent. She recounts a time during the divorce when she sought refuge at a neighbor's home after Errol showed up with a knife looking for her. After the divorce, Musk repeatedly sued his ex-wife for custody of their children. So yeah,
Not surprising at all.
no, I mean, after Elon's behavior, this is all, it seems like it's hereditary almost.
Oh, yeah.
Is it nature or nurture? Who cares? They're shitty people. In the early 1990s, Errol, then aged 45, married Heidi Bezuidenhout, a 25-year-old he described as... yeah, that's her last name. I had to put the pronunciation there. Bezuidenhout. A 25-year-old he described as, quote, one of the best-looking women I've ever seen in my life. Jana Bezuidenhout, who later became his romantic partner, was his stepdaughter from that marriage, 4 years old at the time Errol became her stepfather. Yeah.
What?
Huh?
Yeah, dude,
What?
he pulled a Woody Allen.
Oh, dude.
She was 4 when, he married her mom, and then she later became his romantic partner many years later. So,
Oh, God. What the
Are you just
fuck?
like
What
a complete moral degenerate if you become a colonizer? Is that just what happens? Like you just have
Seems
your
like
brain fucking hell. It's
It
so
goes
gross.
really deep. Yeah, it goes really deep.
yeah. So, in the early 1980s, Errol built a lodge in the Timbavati Game Reserve to rent to tourists. In 1986, he acquired rights to the output of 3 Zambian emerald mines, though he did not own the mines themselves. In interviews with Walter Isaacson, he explained, quote, "If he registered it, you would wind up with nothing, because the blacks would take everything from you." He later referred to his wealth during Elon's teen years in an interview with Business Insider South Africa, saying he had, quote, "so much money we couldn't even close our safe," and mentioned his emerald dealings.
Anyway, so we flew there, and then I landed at a newly built airfield, and I met a company that was registered in Panama, Italians that were building roads, and they'd actually built this airfield as well for the Zambian government. And I told them, they asked me about the plane, and I said, well, I'm going to sell it in England. And then they said, well, if you sell it to us, we'll take it, you see.
Okay.
So I said, all right, fine. So they paid me the same money. And then we stayed with them for a few days, and then they said to us, if I give them half the money back,
Yeah.
then they will give me half their shares in an emerald mine. You know.
So it must be some kind of workaround. I don't know the ins and outs of how the licenses work in South Africa, but it obviously was set up in such a way that, especially during apartheid, you could own the rights to the mines, maybe not own the mines themselves. You would obviously have poor, impoverished black people working the mines for you, often children, and then you would just sit back and collect all this wealth.
I'm guessing what he's referring to when he says, quote, "the blacks would take everything from you," he's referring to having to pay taxes or something.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
probably some tax workaround that he's just framed in the most racist way possible because he's a piece of shit.
To anybody
Yeah.
that had any sort of shaker mover sort of potential that were of African origin in South Africa, that's probably something like that.
I like how he's like, if you registered it, you would wind up with nothing because the blacks would take everything from you. It's like, oh, you mean the people who own the country would take the things they own?
The
Like-
people who should own the means of production, you know?
Yeah. It's like the
Yeah.
people whose country it rightly is would get the wealth from the resources that are rightly theirs. It's like, oh, what a novel concept. You can't have
Yeah.
that. That would be terrible.
Yeah.
How
it's-
awful that would be.
Class consciousness is good for him, not good for them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's a thing Marxists often say is, you know, you're a worker and you're not class conscious. You know, the billionaire class, they're very class conscious. They know exactly what they want. They know what their class does. You know, they're acutely aware.
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
There's a lot of South Africans in Australia.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot. They're fucking everywhere. When apartheid fell apart or was officially abolished, a lot of white South Africans left voluntarily and they went to places like Israel and Australia for obvious reasons.
Yeah, like a white flight sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, a couple of years ago, you know how there's this like right-wing talking point about how white South African farmers are supposedly being massacred?
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of that? Yeah. So at the time, one of our prime ministers, one of the people in his cabinet was like, we need to give out immediate refugee status to these white South African farmers to move to Australia.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Won't somebody think of the whites?
Yeah. Beautiful white South African farmers.
Never met a nice South African. No, he's never met a nice South African. And it's not bloody surprising, man, 'cause we're a bunch of arrogant bastards who hate black people.
So let's see, I left off, I was talking about how much of a piece of shit Errol Musk was. Yeah, so he married his stepdaughter. He's so much of a piece of shit that Elon says he's a piece of shit, which is saying something. But anyway, getting back into it. So during that interview with Business Insider South Africa, saying he had, quote, so much money we couldn't even close our safe. Snopes confirmed that at some point he owned a, quote, stake in an emerald mine near Lake Tanganyika in Zambia. He once described his emerald mine as a, quote, under-the-table operation. So yeah, exactly the tax shelter scheme you were describing, Jared.
Makes sense.
According to the 2015 biography of Elon Musk titled Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, and the Quest for a Fantastic Future.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
What a fucking title of a book.
In 1995, Errol Musk gave $28,000 to Elon and Kimball as they were starting up their software company, Zip2. Elon Musk has denied receiving the money from his father.
I would take the money home and put it into the safe, because we used it again to buy more emeralds later on, to keep on going, because we did this for about 7 years. And the safe was not that big. And so I would stash the money in there, and I'd tell my two boys, Elon and Kimball, they can take money from the safe for anything they need. They must just leave a note, a little white note. Sometimes I would open the safe and the notes would all fall out. but yeah, no, I did put a lot of money into the safe like that. Yeah.
So why would Elon then tweet, I think it's December 2019, he tweeted, "You didn't own an emerald mine, and I worked my way through college, ending up $100,000 in student debt."
Well, it's first of all, it's my children, so they've got an axe to grind, you see.
Errol is a pro-natalist.
What the fuck?
Just, that whole biography of Errol, I just ripped directly from Wikipedia. That's just what they say about him. I'm like, wow, it's just straight to the point, and he's just a piece of shit.
Wait, at the risk of sounding like a total idiot, what is pro-natalist?
Oh, so he's just in favor of people having babies, which is like the same thing that Elon is all about, where he's like pretending it's some kind of emergency that people need to have more babies, like humans are in decline. And then when you get down to it, several podcasts, I think Seriously Wrong, maybe QAnon Anonymous, I can't remember who I heard do this. Could have even been citations needed. Several leftist podcasts have done episodes about the pro-natalist or the, what do you call it, the birth rate panic. And it always boils down to white nationalism. It's always that.
Yeah,
we're being doing it. The colonizers, it makes sense.
It's like the fear of the Great Replacement, like we need to have more white babies to do shit. That's so fucked up.
There's also an element of eugenics.
Mr. President, I would not rule out the chance to preserve a nucleus of human specimens.
Beyond being about breeding more white kids, but also they talk about how, we're rich, right? Rich and perfect people, so we're going to have rich and perfect kids who are smart, because Elon Musk, as we all know, is a genius. So his kids will be geniuses as well, which is why I as a genius need to father as many kids as possible. That's the pro-natalist billionaire outlook. They actually think that their genius will rub off on their kids. First of all, they're not geniuses, they're fucking stupid. But second of all, that's not how genetics works anyway, but whatever.
Yeah. I think he has a trans daughter who is very like, my dad is a piece of shit human being.
Yeah, she won't speak to him.
Yeah, I feel like that's a step in the right direction.
He also constantly misgenders her and continues to refer to her as his son.
Yeah.
And says the woke mind virus took his son from him.
Right.
And stuff like that. No, that's a literal quote. That is a word.
It'd be funny if it wasn't so fucking bigoted.
Yeah, no, it's just whenever I hear someone complain about the woke mind virus, it just always like kicks me in the nuts every time I hear it.
The fact that guy's talking about a mind virus when he hangs out with a fucking guy who had a brainworm, like, bro, the call's coming from inside the house.
That's so
it's
true.
your fucking guys. Your guys are the ones who have viruses and worms in their brains. It's not left-wing people or trans people who want to just be fucking left alone and live normal lives.
Mm.
The fascist mind virus.
Yeah. The fascist brainworm that tells RFK to outlaw the polio vaccine. That's fucking
RFK, dude.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Well, we can't get into RFK right now, but speaking of Elon Musk's children disowning him, Musk was interviewed by Neil Strauss of Rolling Stone for a profile of Elon. Errol recalled that he had once shot and killed in self-defense, quote, 3 out of 5 or 6 armed people who had broken into his home. Elon described his father Errol as a, quote, terrible human being, adding, quote, almost every evil thing you could possibly think of, he has done. So yeah, just a whole
ironic
family of people who hate each other generationally, and I have zero sympathy for any of them.
So I'd just like to add to this that there's a lot of South Africans who live in Australia, and my dad, who's like a boomer, he goes to the pub and he drinks, and sometimes there's these old boomer South Africans from the apartheid era who fled to Australia after apartheid, or just left voluntarily. Pretty much every South African from that generation who's like an old bloke who came over from apartheid has probably murdered a black person in South Africa. And they had admitted to my father at the pub that they had killed. They had alluded to it. They didn't outright admit it, but they had alluded to that they had killed people in South Africa. So it's like, this is very, very common, and it's disgusting, obviously. Mm-hmm. But they just talk about it so brazenly because after apartheid fell, they could just leave and go to places like Australia or Israel and suffer none of the consequences for their horrendous fucking crimes. I almost wish I knew who this guy was so I could just report him to the cops. Nothing would happen, but it's just something.
Yeah.
You can't just be walking around in public. Like, the fact that there's people walking around from South Africa from this period who've committed horrendous crimes during apartheid, in Australia is just mind-blowing to me.
Mhm.
They're just around.
It reminds me of living in the South, and you've ever heard of like sundown cities or something like that, where if you're black and you are traveling through that city, do not stay the night there because literally the KKK mob will come after your ass. In 2024, it's pretty fucked up.
No, that is what I think will be one of the things that comes out of us doing this series and several other series along these same lines, is that we are surrounded by monsters who are getting away with vicious crimes against humanity because they were attacking the people that the state deems expendable. They were attacking queer people. They were attacking women, prostitutes, homeless people, poor people, whatever. Whatever minority of the state at that time, whether it was some colonial project or another, or an outright fascist project that we don't call that we call the neoliberal democracy that enslaves people. That's the story of where we're getting at here. But back to Elon and his ancestors, just to wrap up the story of the Musk family. So the majority of Elon's ancestors were descended from the free burghers or other early settlers to South Africa, or in the case of his paternal and maternal grandmothers, later English and Canadian settlers, respectively. And his family's ties to the emerald industry, as well as to South African government, begin with his father Errol, who is a despicable figure in not only his predatory business dealings, but personally as well. So again, I expected the wealth to go back a little further, but this is really just to show that, you don't have to be a genius. Like, I'm sure Elon is particularly bright at engineering, but he's not some kind of one-of-kind genius of humanity that deserves to have billions of dollars. He just came from generational wealth. It didn't even have to go back that far. They just were able to create wealth out of the friendly conditions for their class during the time of apartheid, and then carry that over into generational wealth by migrating to other friendly colonial states, and then have a bunch of lucrative government contracts in the case of Elon. So it also helps if you're like a charlatan and a showman like he is.
I agree with everything you just said, except for the part where you said Elon is a good engineer. He's not even that either.
I thought he was like somewhat bright at engineering school at least. Like I thought he at least had some kind of prowess. No, he didn't even have that.
No, he has one patent at Tesla that he's credited for. It's the doors on the Tesla that you push in and open. And these are the doors, by the way, that routinely lock people in the car and cause people to burn to death in lithium fires.
All right,
and
so
they
that comes
also,
back around. I like him again.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And also, the doors do not work if the weather... They actually freeze shut, so you can't get into your car. Yeah. It's so awesome. So yeah, that's his one contribution to Tesla, is creating doors that kill people.
Yeah. That kill Tesla owners. I'm for it.
Well, actually, yeah.
So we'll leave it off there. And the next episode, we will talk more about the system of apartheid, its effects on the society of South Africa, and the blowback. And we'll talk about groups like Nkanto Wisiwe and people like Nelson Mandela.
Yep.
So that'll be a good one.
Nelson Mandela was a true G. He was a cool guy.
Yeah. Nelson Mandela's cool. I think I even said in the previous episode, he's like the most famous South African, and then Shaka Zulu is like the second.
Yeah.
But I want to give a lot of credit to like the militant arm. For this show, at least. Like, that's what I want the focus to be on. It's like, we could do the great man theory and be like, Nelson Mandela did a bunch of sit-downs and peaceful protests, yada, yada. Or we could be like, well, he was backed up by Nkamto Wisiwe, who was the militant wing, and they had a bunch of rifles and bombs and shit, so...
It's very similar to, like, MLK being, defanged and Malcolm X being far less celebrated, for the American Civil Rights Movement. Same thing with, like, all the guys from the Black Panther movement, like Fred Hampton and all those guys. This
will probably be a hot take, but it sort of illustrates what happens when you overthrow an unjust regime in a more reformist kind of way, which is what ended up happening with the ANC. It was peaceful and it was reformist, and it still keeps in place the structural inequality while abolishing the legal inequality, which is still good to abolish the legal inequality, of course, but the structural economic inequality of South Africa stuck around after the end of apartheid, whereas in countries like China and Russia and Cuba and Vietnam, when they overthrew their unjust regimes and instituted their socialist regimes, they did not just do a legal reform of that country, they very violently kicked out everyone who was part of the previous regime. They didn't just allow them to continue living among them and to keep their stolen wealth. They took their stolen wealth off them and gave it back to the people.
Absolutely.
That's the main difference. But, everything's a product of its material circumstances. Maybe the ANC were concerned about starting a full-on, war that might have resulted in Afrikaners doing a genocide or something. Maybe they were worried about that. Who knows?
Yeah,
but,
really, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might say it's not enough to do a political revolution. You also have to have a cultural revolution.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, I'll see you guys on Saturday for free.
Okay, sweet.
I'll see you guys in the Discord.
All
See you
right.
later.
I wanna take you to a gay bar. I wanna take you to